I want to welcome everyone to the November 2nd, 2023 meeting of the Seattle Design Commission. Our meetings are being held on WebEx and are also being recorded, and they will be posted at a later date on the Design Commission website. This morning from 9 until 10:30, actually our day today until noon is devoted to city integration and working with the West Seattle to Ballard Light Rail Extension teams, both within the city and at Sound Transit. From 9 until 10:30 this morning, we'll be getting a briefing from the city's team on WSBLE that will be led by Vera Giampetro, Sarah Maxana, and Lizzie Mall at Seattle Department of Transportation. And we're hoping that Helen Brecht in the mayor's office will be joining us as well. From 10:30 until around noon, we'll have a briefing by Sound Transit on their station experience design guideline work that is influencing design outcomes in station and other infrastructure that's of interest to the commission. We always have an opportunity for public comment. If we have members of the public attend today, we will make sure that we have a time for the members of the public to make up to 2 minutes of comment today. I think what would be helpful at this point, we can go ahead and start with introductions. We'll start with people in the room, with commissioners, and then we have 2 commissioners, Molly and Phoebe, who are attending virtually today. And then we'll have introductions of the presenters who are also on WebEx today. Why don't we go ahead and start from my right to left, and we'll start with Elizabeth. And if you introduce yourself, could you also tell people your role on the commission?
Good morning, Elizabeth Connor, and I'm the Artist Commissioner.
Hello, Matt Alves, Architect Commissioner.
Morning, Adam Emrine, Urban Planning Commissioner and Vice Chair.
Oh, that's me. Jay Backman, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Get Engaged Commissioner.
Morning, Kevin O'Neill. I'm the Transportation Planning Commissioner.
And Molly, and then Phoebe.
Good morning, I'm Molly Spitalnik. I am the Urban Design Commissioner.
And Molly, I understand that you may have a disclosure for our next item. Do you want to go ahead and make that now?
Yes, I would love to. So I know that the second presentation today will be about the station experience design guidelines. Those were completed by my firm ZGF, and I was adjacent to that work and continue to hold some of that content for our firm, though the contract is not still open.
Thank you, Molly. Phoebe?
Good morning, everyone. I'm feeling under the weather, so just have my camera off for today, but I'm the Landscape Architect Commissioner.
Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you.
Vera, could you start with your team? I think it's just today online. It's Vera and Molly and Lizzie.
Yeah, and Sarah is in the room.
Sarah's
there.
here.
Great. Sarah, I'll let you go first, and then I'll bring it back here.
I'm Sarah Maxana. I'm the program director for the Sound Transit program at SDOT.
And on the spot, thank you.
Thank you.
Vera and Lizzie.
And I'm Vera Giampietro. I am the Ballard Link Extension Project Manager for Sound Transit program at SDOT. Pass it to Lizzie.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzie Mall, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm a transportation planner at SDOT, working on the South Downtown Hub planning effort.
Okay, thank you. Are you, Sarah, are you going to be kicking us off, or is that Vera this morning?
I'm going to kick things off with introductions, which it seems like we've already done. But I'd be happy to start us off with our slide deck, and I believe Vera is going to share screen to bring that up if we're ready to go into that agenda.
Yep.
Okay.
Let me know if you can see it.
There it is.
Yes.
Thank you, Vera.
Right.
So good morning. Thank you for having us back. I was here, I think, the first week of July, perhaps, as what was our first of quarterly updates on the city's work to support the planning, permitting, and delivery of ST3 investments in Seattle. While the Design Commission will have many very specific briefings on topics related to the project, these quarterly updates are really just meant to be a regular touch point to give you information about what the city team is up to, how we're working with Sound Transit, how we're engaging with community, and to get questions or interest comments from you so that we can tailor future presentations to meet the needs that you have as you are working to support these projects as well. Go ahead to the next slide, Vera, which I have a feeling might say what I just said. Yep, these are quarterly briefings. Today, we're going to spend a little bit of time giving an update on what we used to call Wsble, but we now call Wsble and Blee, the West Seattle Link Extension and Ballard Link Extension projects. Give a little bit of highlights from what we've been up to since our last meeting, but some highlights really from 2023, and then a little bit on what we anticipate as our areas of focus for 2024. Go ahead to the next slide. And I'll be kind of running through a number of the slides, and I'll hand things off periodically to Vera, who is, as she introduced herself, currently our Ballard Link Extension project manager. But as we do not currently have a West Seattle project manager, she's working in both roles. Very grateful to that. And Lizzie Mull with our policy and planning team at SDOT, who is supporting our work in the CID and Pioneer Square South Downtown area. So West Seattle Link Extension and Ballard Link Extension projects, what we used to call a single project, was always two projects being planned together and have now been formally split into two projects following separate timelines and separate environmental review processes. And I know Sound Transit will speak more to the specifics of that bifurcation in their presentations. But at a high level, we always start off with any presentation that we ever do talking about West Seattle and Ballard or ST3 more generally is that reminder that these are the largest infrastructure projects in the city's history with enormous potential to have positive impact on how community members move around our city, accessing residences and jobs and services, but also with the potential of very significant impacts as they are created and developed through existing communities. The projects include more than 12 miles of new light rail track, 13 newer expanded stations, a new light rail only tunnel through downtown, and 2 water crossings. So moving into the project timeline, I want to emphasize that these are Sound Transit projects. We're supporting them, and so the timelines that we're putting up here is our understanding from our partnership from Sound Transit. These are estimated timelines as the Sound Transit is responsible for the timeline and working through a number of unknowns still as the projects are still in the planning phase. But generally, for West Seattle Link Extension, we're at the tail end of the planning phase. The draft EIS is complete. The board action to modify the preferred alternative is complete, and we're expecting the final EIS, a board action, and the record of decision in mid-2024. Following that is the key city action. The city will have a body of legislation that will formally adopt the project, and that action is necessary so that our departments can issue permits for the project. It has to be adopted by City Council first. And with that body of legislation, we will also be looking at likely a number of additional actions, including amending our transitway agreements, looking at transit station area overlays, and looking at a host of code amendments that I know we've provided some updates and will continue to provide you updates throughout 2024 on code amendments to both facilitate the permitting of the projects, but also to ensure that Ballard Link extension, because there were so many changes to the project through the draft EIS phase and the further studies that Sound Transit engaged on with agencies and community that produced a number of new stations that were outside of the DEIS. Sound Transit is publishing a new draft or a second draft EIS for Ballard Link extension, and we're expecting that. If here the slide is not. There we go. Thank you.
The sound cut out for like 10 seconds, and so you may have moved to the next slide, but I couldn't hear that. So just,
Gotcha.
I don't know if there's something with the sound in the room, but I'll just like raise a flag if that happens again. There we go.
All right. Well, it moved now, so thank you.
Yeah.
So for Ballard Link extension, as noted, we're expecting that second draft EIS towards the end of 2024. The final EIS board action and record of decision would then be in the following years, 2025. And then we would have to pass a similar body of legislation following that record of decision. And so we would expect that to be in 2026. Of course, eventually that goes into construction. Service delivery for West Seattle is still planned for 2032, and for Ballard in 2039. So I want to provide you with some highlights from what we've been up to in 2023. As you know, in 2022, the Sound Transit Board took action on a preferred alternative, modify the preferred alternative for West Seattle Link extension. That followed a city council resolution that had a city position recommending segments for both Ballard and West Seattle. But that action in 2022 identified further studies for Sound Transit to conduct with community and with partner agencies to further inform the board action on Ballard Link extension. That action on Ballard Link extension to modify the preferred alternative happened in a couple phases in 2023. In March, the Sound Transit Board identified the preferred alternative for the entirety of Ballard Link extension from CID through Ballard, but did identify some additional work in the area of the Denny and South Lake Union stations. That additional work was carried out between March and June, and then in July, which I think was just a few weeks after our last briefing here, the Sound Transit Board modified the preferred alternative in the Denny station to what is called the Denny Westlake Shifted North station, and also directed staff to carry forward the Denny Westlake Shifted West alternative that would consolidate the Denny and South Lake Union stations into one location, roughly at Denny and Westlake, and to carry that forward as part of the ongoing environmental review. The city team supported those positions that our board members took through technical analysis. We also worked with Sound Transit on a coordinated approach for consistency in the design work, particularly on West Seattle station areas, but also through parts of Ballard as well. That focused on the development of light rail design guidelines, development standards. That's our planning team and our permitting team. Those will all inform the code amendment legislation next year, and I know we'll be in front of you many times to discuss that before then. Bike parking, both the quantity and the locations of bike parking, that is also going to be part of our code amendment discussion. That's our planning and permitting teams. Looking at policies for activation under guideways. That is our planning team that is looking at that, particularly for those longer stretches of elevated guideways, how we can ensure that those areas underneath are activated and safe. Looking at planning and pickup and drop off, that is also part of our planning team, and then bus layover, looking at station areas where we anticipate particularly buses that are going to be terminating at those stations where we have that layover space. We also had, and this is probably kind of our most exciting thing since we last met with you, we had the opportunity to be in community, and we jointly planned an engagement event with Sound Transit that took place a week ago. I know Valerie, you were there, which was great to see. And for a lot of us, it was the first, we've been working on this project for years, and it was the first time that we've been in community doing public events again. And it was just, I have to say, like, exhilarating in so many ways to just be physically in person talking about this project. I really want to commend Sound Transit for their partnership in that event, and the turnout on the staff side at both the city and Sound Transit to ensure that whatever question somebody had, there was a subject matter expert in the room that was able to either provide them an answer on the spot or give them additional information that would answer their question afterwards. We had, Sound Transit had their real property team there that was able to talk with property owners that would be impacted directly by the project, and that was just incredibly valuable. And we had stations set up, joint stations set up for each of the light rail stations in the West Seattle Link Extension Project. So the 4 stations of Soto, Delridge, Avalon, and Alaska Junction, with a focus on the station context planning work that's been going on for a few years now, looking at bus integration, access, and the circulation within the stations and the station design themselves. The city had several tables as well to talk about, this was our first engagement on some of the code amendment discussions, and as well as the street design concepts for those adjacent streets around stations, the design guidelines that the city's developing, and the light rail development standards that'll be part of that code amendment conversation next year. The turnout, I don't have an actual number. I don't know, Vera, or if you've actually heard a number, or perhaps Sound Transit will be able to present on it. I think maybe Phoebe is on the call, but you know, it felt like there were just hundreds and hundreds of people there. And it was, you know, even the folks that had a lot of concerns about the project and how it would impact their business or their home. It was a very, you know, very collaborative space to get answers, or questions answered. But very grateful to Sound Transit for their partnership on that. I'm going to hand things to Vera to talk a little bit about some of the work we've been doing in West Seattle.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you, Sarah. Can you all hear me okay? Is it quiet and not too quiet? Okay.
A little quiet, but
a little quiet. I'm going to try and use my loudest
okay.
appropriate voice here. And sorry to everyone who's online. So we met with you and presented back in July on the design tools that the city and Sound Transit will be using through the Design Commission review process. We did quite a bit of describing the inputs that are going into the design before it arrives at the Design Commission. So if you recall, there were probably a list of a dozen different ways in which we're coordinating with Sound Transit leading up to preliminary engineering and the design that you will see we expect in 2024 for West Seattle Link Extension. And we're actively engaged in one aspect of that right now, which is helping Sound Transit develop their preliminary engineering drawings that they will eventually submit to a final designer through after the PE work is done. So Sound Transit is convening us, the city staff, King County Metro, the Port of Seattle, many of their subject matter experts as needed to engage in a variety of topical discussions at each of the stations and also at the key sort of interface locations between Sound Transit's project and our city landscapes and infrastructure. So I'll use an example. The engineering work group in the city Sound Transit program that partners with the engineering work group at Sound Transit invests a lot of time making sure that Sound Transit's project works with the existing city infrastructure so that the infrastructure that is coming into the city through this project works well and is properly placed, is not going to impact infrastructure in an adverse way or in a way, at least a way that can be mitigated. So, for example, there has been time, yes?
Sorry to interrupt. I can't hear you. Can you speak louder?
Oh, wow. Okay, yes.
It's really quiet.
It's really
quiet. Okay, how about now? Can you hear me any better now?
Yeah, and maybe speak a little more slowly. It's the mic, it's the speaker out over here. Sorry.
How about I'm going to keep going, and then just someone raise their hand if it gets quiet again.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Practically have the microphone in my mouth here. Let's do this. Okay, so I'll just restate really quickly that the city's engineering work group is working closely with Sound Transit's engineering work group to make sure that the light rail extension project is not adversely interacting with or impacting city infrastructure. So one example is the West Seattle Bridge. And if you may recall, having spent a little bit of time looking at the proposed Duwamish crossing that this project proposes, a new overwater crossing over the Duwamish, making sure that the overwater crossing and the West Seattle Bridge are compatible structures that do not have, interactions with one another that are unsustainable. So that's one of many, many examples where the city is coordinating through preliminary engineering to make sure that the project that they submit, that Sound Transit submits through the SIP, the Street Improvement Project Program, and the MUP Master Use Program efforts in SDOT and SDCI are permittable projects that don't need to go through extensive deviation processes once they arrive in the permitting space. And so that's a lot of our work right now, is to help Sound Transit with their preliminary engineering work to make sure that their applications for permits are somewhat vetted by the city in a way that there's a path to permitting, and that the permitting process does not get tied up in issues to the extent possible that should have been resolved early in the project. So that's our work right now with West Seattle Link Extension and preliminary engineering. And I will turn it back over, I believe, to
I think we're going to hand it to Lizzie.
Vera. Go ahead, Lizzie.
Thanks, Vera. Can you all hear me in the room?
We're trying to enhance the experience.
Okay.
It's better.
I'll try to talk slowly as well and loudly.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. We're rolling with it. Vera, I am getting a little bit of feedback, so I don't know if it's you or maybe it's the room. Okay, so
That's good. Yeah, good.
I want to share this super exciting body of work that we're kicking off in a couple of weeks. Staff at the city are collaborating with Sound Transit and other partners to respond to Sound Transit Board's direction from earlier this year. The board action puts forth that regardless of station locations, there are improvements that all of the agencies can be investing in to better serve the neighborhoods and regional travel. So through this work, we'll be developing a list of public realm access and neighborhood connection improvements. And part of this work is seeking to clarify potential scope and schedule of these improvements and working together to identify funding and partnership opportunities. I want to stress that we are not starting from square one with this work. It really builds on Sound Transit's further studies effort from last year, as well as past community and agency planning efforts. And then we'll also continue community engagement. And next slide, please, Vera. And speaking of community engagement, we're having our kickoff on November 15th from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m. at Union Station. And hopefully it will be just as exciting as the West Seattle open house from last week. This will kick off a public process for the South Downtown Hub planning. And we'll have some activities to do that build on past community planning studies. And we want your input on how to build on those ideas. Sound Transit will also have information about the Ballard Link extension projects, and they'll be there to answer questions and share what's to come. And we will have staff attending who are working on adjacent or associated projects and can also share more information about their work. So really hope that y'all can join us. And I'm going to pass it back to Sarah.
Thank you, Lizzie. So I'm going to pivot us into 2024, looking forward to the year ahead. There's a lot of milestones in front of us and a lot of activity that we are hoping to get through. Let's go ahead to the next slide. The first is to finalize our permit plan. We have been engaging with Sound Transit since before I was with the project, so maybe 2018, on developing a joint permit plan for West Seattle and Ballard Link extensions, recognizing that this is a 12-mile long project that weaves in and out of public and private property, and that private property, every single parcel has different zoning classifications with different standards, and the task of permitting a project like that with existing code would be a nightmare. And in the interest of all of the voters that want this project and voted for this project, our agencies have been working together for years on an iterative document on how to streamline this permitting process, how to create a single code for light rail developing through this corridor. This work has, this will be the final iteration. I think it's the fourth of iteration that we've had of the permit plan. It includes deliverables related to the code amendment legislation, the code amendments that will be in the legislative package that I mentioned earlier. It looks at the application processing process itself. So looking at our street improvement plans, looking at our master use permit, all of our construction permits, all of our permit processes, how can we streamline those processes to make them move as fast as possible for this project? Looks at the station context framework and urban design concurrences. And so looking at all of this early work that Sound Transit is doing through environmental review with community, with joint agencies, some of this preliminary engineering work and pre-permitting work that Vera mentioned earlier. How can we get the greatest durability possible in some of that work so that it can carry forward through the permitting process? Engineering and design concurrences, that's part of that as well. The project review and commissions process is part of that permit plan. So looking at how the project goes through the project review process with Seattle Design Commission and with community as well. Design guidance, looking at all of those design tools, including the design guidelines that we've brought to you before and will continue to bring to you. And then concurrence, implementation, and project management is a catch-all area of how that project, how all of these elements are then carried forward through the project and accompany the project. So how we are staffing and how we are managing the workflow of carrying that project through the permit process. And we're expecting an iteration of that in 2024, a final iteration of that permit plan in 2024. Also in 2024, following the record of decision for West Seattle Link Extension, we will have this body of legislation that we mentioned earlier. It will amend the Transitway Agreement. It will adopt the project to be built for West Seattle Link Extension, which again, that enables the city to issue permits for the project. It'll amend the city codes and regulations to facilitate the permitting process, advance city and community priorities. That is all in that development standards and code amendment work that we're doing. It will likely enact station area overlays for those known stations in West Seattle or other tools to support longer term station area planning. And there will also likely be specific pieces related to the transfer or the use of city property that might be impacted by the project itself that might have triggers for council action in order for those properties to be used. We're expecting that body of legislation to follow the record of decision, and so we'll be following Sound Transit's timeline on that. Go ahead to the next slide. Where are we? For West Seattle Link Extension, in particular, we've got a lot happening in the planning, permitting, and engagement space. As mentioned, we had this engagement last week, but we'll be engaging community on the street design concepts. Those are the design concepts for the stations, for the streets that are adjacent to the stations, the design guidelines, the development standards that will inform that code amendment package. That engagement is going to be continuing in Q4 of this year and into Q1 of next year. In the permitting space, the preliminary engineering milestones, which includes the Design Commission's review, at the pre-permitting reviews of the Wsble stations, and select non-station project components. That will happen in 2024. We will have a staff process that will be supporting the review of those elements of the project. And then environmental, the city will be coordinating. We continue to partner with Sound Transit on the development of their environmental review documents. We'll be looking at the the publication of the final EIS with a focus on methodology, impacts mitigation, looking at the response to the comments that the city provided on the draft EIS back in May of 2022. We'll be coordinating with Sound Transit on mitigation through pre-permitting process and design, and as design progresses, with the goal of identifying appropriate mitigation measures and ensuring that they're agreed upon in advance of permitting so that it does not stall or create any delay later. For Ballard Link Extension, I'm on the wrong page. There we go. For Ballard Link Extension, as mentioned earlier, Ballard Link Extension is on a separate environmental review process right now. The draft EIS that was the joint draft EIS from last year still pertains to Ballard, but Ballard will issue, or Sound Transit will issue a second draft EIS for Ballard with a focus on those new stations that came out of the further studies process, the community engagement process that Sound Transit led. The city will be focusing on that second draft EIS is expected towards the end of 2024. The city is going to be focusing on the new station locations. So that's that have been identified. That includes the south of CID and north of CID stations. It includes some refined stations through downtown. The Denny station shifted north and shifted west are both refinements of the DT1 alignment. The Republican shifted west station location for Seattle Center and the Dravis station location for Inner Bay are the stations that are really different from what was studied in the DEIS. So the city team will be focusing on reviewing the impacts, analysis and impacts and mitigation for those new stations. We'll also be focused on several key project elements that we've identified for a long time as having impacts that we want to address through the environmental review process, including the elevated guideway through the Elliott corridor, the impacts, the noise and vibration impacts to sensitive receivers and historic buildings, particularly at Seattle Center, and the cumulative construction impacts as this project is developed through downtown. Sound Transit anticipates the second draft EIS for Ballard Link Extension by the end of 2024. We'll review and comment on that in late 24 or early 2025. And just a note on all of the environmental review, and then I'm going to hand things to Lizzie real quickly. The environmental review of the draft EIS that the city undertook last year was really an all hands on deck. We had over 100 reviewers from 20 city departments, and just recognizing that this is a project that while SDOT might be managing the city team in our capacity, this is a project that affects so many different departments, and it's really a coordinated effort. And I'm very grateful to the subject matter expertise of all of those departments that we're able to bring to bear when we do this review of the environmental documentation. I'm going to hand things to Lizzie again real quickly to talk about some of the South Downtown Hub work for Ballard Link Extension.
Thanks, Sarah. So just to note that South Downtown Hub planning will continue through 2024 with a public workshop series in collaboration with Sound Transit. So anticipate more opportunities to be involved there as well. I'll pass it back to Sarah.
Thanks. And then closing things out before on the substance for 2024, West Seattle and Ballard are very exciting projects, and we enjoy working on them a lot. But it is really, really exciting to know that just around the corner, we have another ST3 project that we're going to be able to talk about, and that's the infill stations at South Graham Street and South Boeing Access Road. Graham Street in particular, our Office of Planning and Community Development have been doing work for years with the Graham community and the Othello community rather. And that community has identified this station for decades as a need. We're very excited that this project, that this work will be getting underway in 2024. Some of that design work to support that infill station, which is scheduled to start service in 2031. We will also have new city staff and resources that we're excited to bring on board. We're at the tail end of several recruitment processes, and we'll have a slightly modified team structure for addressing this very large volume of work ahead of us. And we look forward to bringing that structure to you at our next quarterly briefing to let you know who the team is. And I'm going to hand things back to Vera to talk a little bit about next steps for our work with coordinating with you.
Great, thank you. How does it sound? Are you able to hear me okay?
A little soft.
A little soft, okay.
Yeah. Let me see if I can work
My
some magic.
microphone,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, that's okay. I'll do my best here. So we've been here today and we were here back in July. We have this cadence of quarterly briefings from the city's Sound Transit program in partnership with the Sound Transit quarterly briefing, which you'll hear later this morning. And we expect to return to you in 2024 for our next quarterly briefing, updating you on similar topics and anything emergent. And then we also spoke with you back in July about our design review tools that we're proposing that the Design Commission will use throughout your review process. And we made commitments at that time to come back to you in more focused work sessions to talk about the tools that we've developed and to make sure that we're getting your input so that we can finalize those tools for the permit plan that Sarah mentioned earlier. And so we're looking forward to a lot of engagement in 2024 on the tools themselves and how the Design Commission review process will unfold once we start on West Seattle Link extension reviews in earnest in 2024. And then as noted at the bottom there, we expect the preliminary engineering project reviews for the West Seattle Link extension to begin sometime in next year. We also expect to provide briefing on other topics. So an exciting development that you may be aware of is that the city recently hired our first ETOD, Equitable Transit Oriented Development Strategic Advisor. That person is housed in the Office of Planning and Community Development, adjacent to our Equitable Development Initiative and the FTA grant work, which you may have heard about in recent briefings, which is a grant from the Federal Transit Administration to engage on equitable TOD outcomes for this project. And so we are expecting our TOD advisor to brief you on their work as well as FTA grant work that is unfolding both as a strategy and engagement with specific communities along the West Seattle and Ballard Link extension alignments. We look forward to sharing with you our work, forthcoming work on the Racial Equity Toolkit and its interplay with the Transportation Equity Framework, which is housed in SDOT and is disseminating a series of tactics and strategies through SDOT for reaching toward transportation equity through the city of Seattle. And then as mentioned, we'll be sharing with you our design tools for the Seattle Design Commission Light Rail review process and getting your feedback. And that concludes our presentation today.
It does. I do want to note, I should have said this at the beginning, Elliot Helmbrecht, who was with us last time, is the City of Seattle's ST3 designated representative in the mayor's office. He's out of town and wasn't able to join us today, but normally will attend these quarterly briefings as well. You have myself, Vera, and Lizzie. Nicole Kistler, who's our engagement and partnerships advisor, is out sick today. She had intended to be here. But we will incorporate, I think as we're doing a lot more community engagement in the coming months, we will make sure that we're bringing that and what we're hearing from community to these briefings in the future. With that.
So the only thing that I would add, and you guys did, as always, a terrific job. What Valerie's role is representing the Design Commission's interests. It's difficult to say in 3 bullet points, but essentially Valerie's role, and I think she's made that clear in the work that she's been doing, is making sure that what the values and the issues that the commission are going to care about in station design, and frankly, the West Seattle Bridge, what appears to be a very complex series of investments at Pigeon Point, becoming more and more complex as they're trying to figure out how do you make that turn and reduce the environmental implications of that turn on that hillside, which is sensitive in a variety of ways. Valerie's role has been to make sure that the role, the value, the mission, and all the things that the commission expects to see is integrated in the permitting plan, and figuring out where the design commission's role is and how that influences outcome from a design perspective that's integrated into the city's permitting obligations is the trick we're all trying to balance to make sure that your role is brought along in a timely and informative way to ultimately not only SDOT's obligations for permitting, but frankly, SDCI's, which is another complex part in this because SDCI has an obligation to issue permits on private property, yet a lot of these investments are actually in the public realm, either publicly owned land or within the right of way. So how those two work together is a hard nut to crack. And so Valerie's job is to represent your interests in that permitting group.
And I'll just say we're committed to a streamlined permitting process this time too. And it certainly looks like we're on the road to that, which I think is great. But, you know, within that, our role is to elevate public, you know, the public experience and these stations, and to be there for communities and for neighborhoods and make sure this is the kind of infrastructure we actually want, you know, for the built environment of our city. So I think, you know, we're definitely committed to the streamlining, and I think a big part of that is front loading things and getting in earlier to avoid, you know, popping up with things later in the process.
And that's why, you know, if I may, looking at your briefing schedule for 2024, having those pre-permitting briefing opportunities with the stations and some of these project elements that would otherwise normally happen at 30%, doing them earlier in the process to ensure that your feedback can be incorporated in a timely manner. It's really smart.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I was cheering.
Awesome. Well, thank you for the presentation. Do we have any agency representatives here or on the line that would care to make comments?
Oh, just for public comment.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Or I mean, agency comment, but comment.
Yeah, I'm Julie Montgomery. I'm with Sound Transit. I'll be speaking a little bit later. Did a great job, both you and Vera. I don't really have anything to add.
Thanks, Julie.
Okay, well, same question. Any members of the public, either in person or online, that would care to make a comment at this time? There are none. Okay, I think we're going to go into clarifying questions. So,
I'll help facilitate the discussion. We don't have to actually separate comments from questions today for this briefing. So we could just go around the room and see, and maybe we could do it by topic, I guess, on the West Seattle. Let's start with questions, comments on the West Seattle link first, and maybe just go starting down there.
No questions or comments. I thought it was good. Answered most of my questions.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Great.
So on West Seattle, you talked about the community meeting we just had. This might be a hard question to answer, but one of the things I was trying to do after a big community was like, okay, what were the top 3 or 4 takeaways or key themes or whatever we heard? So I'd love to, I mean, you probably heard about a whole bunch of things, but if there was anything that really resonated with, wow, we heard this over and over again, or this thing's clearly a big deal. Could you talk a little bit more about what some of those were?
Yeah, oh gosh, and I'm so sorry that Nicole wasn't able to join us today. The day after the meeting, our staff debriefed for about an hour and a half where everybody, and it took an hour and a half for us to just get through each of us to say the top 3 things that we heard. Because the facility was so large, we had so many stations that were focused on so many different aspects of the project. One thing that I know came across that I heard consistently from staff, and this is from the city staff that was there, was excitement about the project, which was really great to hear. You know, there's been, this is the first in-person public engagement on the project for West Seattle in a really long time. Remember the DEIS was issued in January of 2022. There was some additional engagement through that DEIS process, but it's been a long time since community has been interacting with Sound Transit staff and city staff in a venue like this. And overall, there was just a really loud, like build it now. So just a lot of excitement about what this means. That said, it's also tempered with but what does it mean? And so wanting to, there were a lot of affected property owners that were in attendance that were asking questions about what it meant for what relocation assistance Sound Transit would provide, and just very grateful that Sound Transit had a team there that was available to talk with business owners and homeowners and property owners about, and businesses and renters as well, about what type of relocation might be expected for those impacted properties. Those were two things that I heard really loudly, and I know Vera and Lizzie, you guys weren't there, but Vera, you were at the debrief maybe, and I'm trying to think, were you, there were, I know, a lot of questions about station access and what it meant, of course, the construction impacts and what it was going to mean for getting through the neighborhood during the development of the construction of the project. Were there any other big takeaways that you recall?
Yeah, I'll just emphasize again how excited people were. I know Sound Transit has heard this. West Seattle would like the project delivered yesterday, and so just a ton of enthusiasm for, I think, the progress that they see being made through the exhibits that Sound Transit presented. And also to the planners, credit on both sides, or for both partners, City and Sound Transit, there were exhibits showing our partnership on street design concepts and soliciting input on things like bike parking and location, quantity, style, what it looks and feels like, what the station looks and feels like, and people were just so delighted to be able to provide their feedback on something that's really tangible. And the exhibits that Sound Transit presented and that the city planning urban design folks presented were really easy to engage with. They were, evocative of what people were hoping to be able to engage on. And so there's a lot of relief there. There was a lot of work done to translate the boards and into multiple languages. We recognized that there was a bit of need to bring more folks in, or maybe do more targeted engagement for folks who may not be sort of the frequent flyers at these events. And so that input was really well received, and there already is work underway, I think, to engage folks more where they are and be able to go out into community into more targeted engagements. But there was the opportunity for anyone attending the event to be able to access the materials in multiple languages. Let's see, I heard that from a few folks at the Sound Transit had brought their consultant design leads, who themselves have been really noodling on a lot of these questions as designers within their respective firms. And so it was really interesting to talk to the consultants and hear sort of their, really getting into the details about how they thought through some of the design solutions that were presented on the boards. I think it was a really positive and trust. I heard a lot of statements about trust building, that it went a long way to sort of build trust between the two agencies that presented in the community that is receiving this project.
I will thank you for that, Vera. I will add, there's also a survey that was issued with the event. There was an opportunity for folks to sit down and complete the survey at the event itself. And that survey is live for quite some time now, that focuses on those stations, again, the station design and access and integration. And we'll be looking forward to getting information on what that survey produces.
Thanks. Matt, I'll have questions and comments on Ballard, but
Okay.
West Seattle.
Okay, great.
To extend off of that comment, for the West Seattle engagement, first of all, great presentation, thank you. But I'm curious, did the West Seattle engagement mostly focus on the stations themselves in that area, or is there going to be any efforts at some point to do any targeted engagement with Indigenous peoples, especially for the Duwamish West Seattle crossing, since that's a very important waterway for them? Has that been something that's in planning? Has it been conducted at all? No.
I don't want to speak to what has been conducted in detail, because Sound Transit would be best positioned to talk about the engagement that they've completed to date. And the city has been jointly planning engagement for the next year with Sound Transit. I know that it includes, as you noted, while this event did focus on the stations and the station area communities, there are pivotal elements of the project that are outside those stations. So the Duwamish water crossing, the impacts at Pigeon Point, are just a couple of them, the guideway through Soto. And so there is a lot of interest in the additional engagement that's needed for those elements of the project. Our team, Nicole Kistler, and our folks at SDOT and DON are working with the Sound Transit engagement team on the plan for that additional engagement that needs to happen between now and the final EIS, and for the city between now and the city legislation. But those are all areas that we've identified as needing some more focused engagement efforts between now and then.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. Go ahead, Adam.
it was, oh,
What did we?
we missed Ben?
No, I had,
He was
Up once.
first, yes.
All right. Okay, I have a couple of, since I'm bad at following directions, I have a couple of kind of project-wide or kind of full scope questions. The first was on your scope. Sarah, I think you were presenting that. I didn't see, and I'm sure you are, but could you say more about how you're integrating with the kind of overall or the broader station area context planning? Because I know that kind of access to and from the stations is, you know, critically important, and I was just hoping to hear a little bit more about that.
I'm happy to talk a little bit about it, and I'm going to lean on Vera as well, as she's our planner emeritus on the project now, with one of the longest standing team members, and had previously been in the planning manager role for this project at the Office of Planning and Community Development. So the station context planning is a joint effort with Sound Transit and the city to look at what we've called the station context, which is about the 1 to 2 block radius around the stations, as being an area of joint jurisdiction, of looking at how are people accessing the station by bike, by foot, by transit, in some cases by drop off, how are folks getting into the station, and how are we designing the stations in a way to facilitate that user experience, that circulation that's necessary for folks to have a positive experience with transit. It looks at TOD potential, it looks at the types of access improvements that we would want to have in that area. And that's a focused area of joint planning. The station planning itself is Sound Transit is the lead, and the city supporting, and then the station area, that broader half-mile radius, the station area planning that we haven't yet started for West Seattle, but will start in the coming years once we know the project to be built. And that's that half-mile radius where we'll really be looking at the broader access patterns in that area and land use patterns to support the station. The Sound Transit put out with the draft EIS last year a station planning progress report, or station context planning project progress report, which looked at every alternative in the DEIS for both Ballard and West Seattle, and provided an update of the station context planning. So that gave a snapshot as of when did it come out? December of 21, or maybe with the actual DEIS in January of 22. And that, since that time, Sound Transit's design and our work with Sound Transit has evolved, and that's what this event was meant to further, is to give the update, the progress report to the progress report, to show what the additional work that we've been doing to think about how folks are accessing these stations, all of the information and the comments that were received during the draft EIS phase, and how that's informing design. That was the main crux of last week's event. Vera, is there anything else to, we could give some specific examples, maybe at Delridge, of, the transit integration work and thinking about the access to the new core facility and how that's gonna affect the traffic patterns and pedestrian access. So that's a huge element that came out of the DEIS, was the pulling down of the alignment so that it wasn't on, and so that it's more aligned with Yancey rather than Andover. That changes a lot of the vehicle circulation patterns in there. So that's work that's all happened jointly in that station context planning space between Sound Transit and the city, based on the feedback that we heard from community during the draft EIS.
Yeah, thank you. I guess just to clarify, I appreciate that. That's really helpful to understand. I guess what I was asking about is more of the station area planning and trying to understand, I guess, the logic of waiting, because in some ways that to me seems like the main event, right? Yep. The train is just a tool. The neighborhood is what we actually care about, and that's where the really huge impact will be. And so I guess I was hoping to hear a little bit more about how the city is planning for infrastructure and land use policy to have in place, so when the station, not waiting for the station, but to have in place so that when the station is open, it's already a complete place.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think maybe, I can jot down a note of maybe bringing someone from OPCD to our next meeting. I think one of the hurdles that we want to get over before we start station area planning in earnest is confirmation of where the station's going to be.
Yeah, sure.
And that doesn't happen until the record of decision and the city adopts the project as well. Right now, there's still a lot of station locations that are in the mix. Most of them are in the same general vicinity,
Right.
but some of them aren't. There are a lot of different alignments that could change. So we're waiting to get to that milestone, and that's when formal station area planning would start. That said, all of this station context planning that we're doing now is setting the groundwork for that. And the city's focus is primarily on what has been identified as the preferred alternative so that we have a head start on that station area planning when we're able to get that underway. But the station area planning itself is still going to start about 7 to 8 years in advance of the station opening. And that's usually, I think, 5 to 10 years is the general vicinity for doing station area planning in advance of. I see everyone looking at their computer. I wonder if anyone's Googling that.
No. I do think it's a topic that maybe in her new role, Erica Bush, being a former commissioner now on that team, and I also think it might be either Jeff Wentland or someone within OPCD to come and talk about if this is where these stations are, what is the existing development capacity that supports transit? Where is additional potential development capacity that doesn't necessarily open the door to more complex development that might not work? Certainly downtown, you can do, that's the optimal outcome for, how much can you actually build, but maybe at Delridge, maybe at West Seattle, looking for what is the existing tools to unlock development capacity? Does the city need to change those in any way? Because I kind of think that's what you're asking
Exactly.
for.
Or the context of what is in that half-mile radius as well. And if we aren't considering that until we've already selected a station location, particularly with things like the Inner Bay location, we place that too close to rail, half of the area of that half-mile radius is rail that we can't develop. So, I mean, similar, I think this is something that the Northgate Station experienced, being next to I-5, is only so much of that radius can actually be developed and experienced by the neighborhood, and the remaining portion cannot be activated.
Yeah, okay.
It helps that we're housed at OPCD, so it's easy for, I think I know what you guys want, so maybe for our January meeting, we'll
be good to hear.
Can I just chime in here as well? So the backdrop of a lot of the work we're doing is on the comprehensive plan update, which I think, I'm not sure if you've received a briefing on that from OPCD, but an HB 1110 that calls for significant zoning changes to the city for missing middle housing. So there's quite a bit that's at play and still very much up in the air as to how the land use policy for the city is going to change in anticipation of this project in particular. So the comprehensive plan is fully aware, of the light rail infrastructure arriving, is planning land use approach and growth strategy around light rail. The details of which are still, being taken through the city process and eventually through a public process. So I think it's a really good thing to pay attention to what's going on with the comprehensive plan, and sort of to the extent possible, being able to respond to what the mayor's office puts out in terms of a proposal, which will obviously impact what happens in these station areas.
And on that, also noting that about a third of the stations in Ballard and West Seattle are in industrial and manufacturing zones. And so recognizing that the recent initiative and legislation for the industrial and maritime strategy impacts what can be facilitated to encourage more light industrial jobs in the vicinity of those stations. And so that is going to help set some of the groundwork for station area planning for a good third of the stations.
So Michael and Valerie, I'm a planner like Adam is, so I know the comp plan is the planning commission's baby, but the extent to which there will be land use changes that affect station areas. And I think some of the issues that you just touched on, it would be great to get a briefing on that at some point. Because that is absolutely the overlay for all this from a land use standpoint. So I think we need to better understand where some of that stuff is coming from, or what might be happening.
Thank you, thank you. So my next question, my kind of final question on this is, it's awesome, and it sounds like you're getting really good feedback on some of your community engagement. I was curious just to know if the public is able to distinguish between the work that the city is doing and Sound Transit is doing, or if that's leading to confusion, or how you're messaging kind of who's doing what and how that's working. Because I guess I'm wondering, well, I don't know how it's going, so yeah.
I think that is one of the most valuable parts of our partnership with Sound Transit, is that we're doing engagement jointly, because I think it does create confusion and puts unnecessary burden on community members to expect them to attend separate events for separate agencies about the same project or about the same area. And so we've been really appreciative of the opportunity to be with Sound Transit in the same room. Yes, we often have a different table because we're talking about something a little bit different that's within the city's purview, or in the context of the community advisory groups that Sound Transit did through the EIS process, which were all online. We would often participate and have our own presentation that talked about the city's position, and we would always do our best to differentiate what the city's role is from Sound Transit. But at the end of the day, a lot of community members are experiencing this as the project. They're not experiencing it as SDOT and OPCD and City Light and separate departments or separate agencies altogether. And so we need to be mindful in all of our engagement to try to present the best partnership we possibly can. And I think last week's event really showcased that. That although we did have different experts in the room that we were able to point community members to, for the most part, we were all there in the same room talking about the project together. And the South Downtown Hub planning that Lizzie highlighted for the South Downtown communities of Chinatown International District and Pioneer Square, looking at the station context planning and the regional hub of those 3 stations and how they might work together. Similarly, we're doing that in partnership with Sound Transit, so that so that community members aren't expected to go to separate meetings or relate to agencies separately.
Great, thank you.
Great. I have just a couple of questions, comments that are also about both the broader process. Great presentation. I appreciate your discussion about the permitting and the needing to streamline. If I were you, I would be extremely terrified of permitting this project. I mean, it's unbelievably large. And I can say that because as an architect, I'm in lead permitting for complex civic public projects, but also commercial projects. I mean, the biggest challenge, it seems to me, is getting concurrent review and interdepartmental communication in a timely manner. And because you have SDCI, obviously, I'm speaking to the broader room, but land use issues and building code issues. You have OPCD, you have Department of Neighborhoods, and then really most critically, you have SDOT and SCL. And those reviews, I have a project right now where 2 years in, we're still working with SDOT and SCL on projects that have already been permitted by SDCI. So I don't know how, to me, that seems to be the biggest crux or the biggest challenge, as opposed to, I think it's great that you're planning to, reconsider or develop a special code, or whether that's land use code, I presume, as opposed to building code. But, to me, I'm just saying the biggest thing is how do we get concurrent and timely interdepartmental city review for this incredibly complex endeavor.
You articulated that challenge well. We actually have the very first project permit is in the door.
Great.
And that is a permit for the relocation of the E3 transmission line to 6th Ave through the through Soto.
Yeah.
And so that is a city light relocation of that transmission line, moving it over to getting it out of the E3 busway so that light rail construction of the elevated guideway can happen. That's the first step. That's a critical path, is moving that transmission line. So the permit process has started for that, and we are working out the kinks in real time. And that is a partnership between SDOT and City Light, the 2 departments that you just identified as ones as being having complicated review processes that are always in need of having a tremendous amount of subject matter expertise and secondary reviewers.
Right.
And so we are working through that this year and identifying the roadblocks and identifying the obstacles so that we can keep it streamlined. We're having quarterly report outs to department directors to keep them apprised of how that permitting process is going. But you're right that this is one of the biggest challenges to delivering this project. Sound Transit identified that right out of the gate in 2017. That is part of that underscores the partnering agreement that the city and Sound Transit have to commit together to a streamlined permitting process. And that's why SDCI and street use at SDOT have been leading with Sound Transit this iterative permit plan for the last 4 years.
I think North 130th was a really good test case as well. I think North 130th was a legacy project in some ways, but as we were all trying to figure out, well, how do we get concurrent reviews? I think it was a good test case. Design had gone on a little too far, but I think the previews of what was going on here, I think was helpful for city agencies.
It seems like, and I'm hoping it's the case, that there are specific individuals or teams of individuals at each of these agencies whose job it is almost solely to support this, because that can be the real breakdown. Obviously, when change in actual individuals, but so that if there's a way of building on that knowledge base of the individuals in the departments who are tasked, I really hope that can happen.
I think there's clear direction from the mayor's office, and I think an expectation by the council that band of experts are being created.
And then my other questions we're getting into land use. I'm just curious, is it clearly there's going to be land use issues of putting these facility stations into the range of zones that exist? It sounds like you're considering changing or creating a special land use code. Is it also as an alternative? Is it possible to streamline the process for keeping the land use code as it is, but streamlining the process for allowing a variation for a station or as needed? Would that not, has that not been considered?
Yes, what's complicated about it is not just that the project weaves across different codes and private property, it's also weaving in and out of public right-of-way and private property. So creating a single code that pertains to that entire project, whether it's hitting public land or private land, helps streamline the delivery of that whole thing.
The land use code deals with buildings. These are structures. And I think that's part of the problem, that don't necessarily meet the height limit currently, that don't necessarily, I think there was a identified need early on that the land use code just simply doesn't know how to deal with these. And so creating a new code section.
But are you able to create a new land use code that doesn't take 10 years to do, as opposed to?
Well, we're 4 years in now, so.
That's part of the legislative package.
That's the code amendment.
It's amazing. It's amazing.
And I think independent of that, Matt, to get to Adam's question, there may be other land use code amendments that open the door to, is this enough development capacity to support our goals? And if not, how do we look at increases in FAR, increases in height, increases?
Great, I'll pass it. Elizabeth?
Thank you for the great presentation, and also for the fact that this is recurring. I think that's really, it's really helpful in the whole process. I appreciate the collaboration that's happening among agencies, among departments and agencies. One question I had, and especially when we're talking about public outreach, I wonder, since there are arts organizations that are affected and involved in these, several, I'm wondering how they are involved in public outreach at this point. I think in transit, frequently the artists themselves come on later, but I think thinking about communities and having that kind of access to what a community cares about early on is very helpful.
So I'm not going to answer that as it pertains to station design, because I have a feeling that there's someone in the room that's better poised to do that. As it relates to community engagement, I do want to note, and again, I'm just so sorry that Nicole Kistler wasn't able to join us because her background is in the arts community. And one of the grants that the city has been able to secure to support this project is a grant from the National Endowment of Arts to work with art-based organizations in the station areas on how their input can be incorporated into the station design, the city's station design guidelines, and the
the eventually broader station area planning work. But for your specific question, I might kick it over to my colleague in the gallery.
Yeah, sounds good. So Julie Montgomery, Director
Yes,
of Architecture and Art. And we have been doing some, like getting an artist to do early research on an alignment in Lake Plumbing Engineering into early final design. And that's been really fantastic to really dig into what are the communities around the area, what's important to them, and get sort of behind things in a deeper way than we can. So there are plans to get that going. It's not started yet, but we do want to get that going, especially for West Seattle.
So you've already selected an artist, or you?
No.
But that's great. That's good news.
It's in our work. But we have to get it.
Yeah, and I think it's an area that sometimes gets put further down on the list, but I'm hoping that kind of overlap and collaboration does.
Yeah, and the
include
thing
the
is, it's been so helpful for them, even selecting the specific artists at the station sites. And it helps guide the group to say, okay, well, this type of an artist might be best here, and then narrow that down. And then it also provides some background for the artist to do their work and take.
Great. And another question that has some overlap. How much are communities aware of the RET and equity policies, and where the city and Sound Transit are where and how these agencies are working towards equity?
Oh, I can tell you how we are incorporating the RET. I don't know that I can necessarily answer from the perspective of community, how aware community is of the work. So if I could twist your question around to one that I feel better qualified to respond to. The two areas of focus in West Seattle and Ballard Link extensions for the RET, the two priority areas, I should say. There's a RET focus for the whole corridor, the whole project, but the priority communities that were identified back in 2017 when we did alternatives analysis was the Delridge community and the Chinatown International District. Chinatown International District in particular, through the further studies work where Sound Transit and the city had, I believe it was a 6-month community process that was focused on looking at refinements to the station alternatives that were on the table. That process that generated additional alternatives at 4th Ave as well as the north of CID and south of CID station. The RET was featured throughout that process. And the city, when we were looking at informing our own position on the work that was happening there, we were looking at the RET. And actually, I realized that Lizzie's on the call as well and could probably speak to this as well. In Delridge, our primary focus and application of the RET has been acknowledging that the primary RET community that is accessing that station is coming from further south in the corridor, not in the immediate vicinity of the station area. So it's been working with Sound Transit to think more broadly about the impacted population as not just being those that live or work within that half-mile radius, but those that are accessing the station from further south. And because of that, there's been a real focus, a RET focus in Delridge on the station integrate or the transit integration user experience going from Metro to Link at that Delridge station and trying to ensure the safest and most seamless transit integration experience as possible. And so that has been carried through our station context planning and I think was featured prominently at the engagement event last week. I don't know that users come to that Delridge station and think, oh, this is coming out of the RET work, or if what they see and what they experience, I hope, is that this is considerations that the agencies are thinking about to create a safe and seamless user experience for all users accessing the station. Vera and Lizzie, do you have anything that you want to add as it relates to application of the RET in those communities?
Sure, I can just add briefly around the Chinatown International District, and I want to emphasize what Sarah shared about like the racial equity toolkit being a toolkit that agency partners are using to really come together around shared values and vision for what we feel like will help produce a more equitable process and working with communities on that. So having that be kind of the background to a lot of the work we're doing and having that be kind of embedded in what we put forward. So yeah, to just emphasize, like, I don't know if people would say like, this is because of the red, but it's really supposed to be, you know, how we show up too. Vera, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I think one way that we're using the racial equity toolkit internally, and then when we have the opportunity to reflect that back to communities, is in preliminary engineering and in other venues. We're in our work meetings holding up the red outcomes that were established several years ago and have been iterated on since then, and saying, you know, when we look at this, when we look at the plan, when we're establishing our you know, our access configurations, we're holding up the red outcomes and saying, you know, this was our stated outcome for the project. Are we meeting those goals? And so that's a regular sort of feeding the work back into the decision making that we're doing at the project level. So among staff in, you know, design meetings, that kind of thing. We do recognize that I think at this time we're needing more support in our racial equity program for the city. And so we're looking to hire a racial equity strategist for the project, and very much looking forward to bringing that capacity on board so that that person who can facilitate discussion around racial equity outcomes and help build capacity within the team to be able to speak to those outcomes and the criticality of them is something that we're really looking forward to adding to the team, I think in early 2024.
Thank you for all that. Just a thought, sometimes some transparency around those values and processes can help collaborate, I think, with regular citizens. As you were talking, I was thinking for me as an artist, I get to be behind the scenes a lot on projects that I otherwise would not, and it actually helps me empathize with certain jobs and agencies, so just a thought based on that and also the inclusion of the Indigenous communities. I think it helps, so communities might have more ideas about how to be more inclusive of communities that don't show up at your meetings. And I will show up for the CID. And one last thing, it makes me so happy to see South Graham and Boeing Access on the slide. It's just thrilling. Thank you. Congratulations. And let's see where we go.
Well, we have a few more minutes, so let's talk.
Molly?
Oh, I'm sorry, excuse me, sorry. Sorry, I forgot about you, Molly. Please go ahead.
And Phoebe,
And
maybe.
Phoebe, please go ahead.
Okay, great. Okay, so for West Seattle, so I did have the opportunity to attend the West Seattle public event, and I just want to say from that I greatly appreciated the Sound Transit and city coordination at that. I got to actually see community members have questions and ask someone at Sound Transit and have that specific question turn them from the boards to the tables and turned over to the person who could answer their questions. So that was useful. I was asking questions in a similar way. So I want to encourage everyone in the room on the design commission side to, whenever you're able, attend those, because there's so much that we learn from having both Sound Transit and the city in the room at the same time. There are questions sometimes we can't have answered in briefings. Similarly, I appreciate having both Sound Transit and city folks in the room today. So thank you. Thank you, Valerie, for bringing that together, and both sides for being in the room today. But I really just want to express appreciation for that availability for the community. Similarly, so I heard a couple of comments around the room about equity of involvement. So those who were in the room at that event really had a lot of benefit in having their questions answered in a clear way in terms of the tangible impacts in the space, not just in terms of the agencies who would be driving those impacts. And so I'm curious to hear if how readily those materials are available to those who were not able to attend, how those materials can be viewed by others in the community, as well as this may be a Nicole question, so it may be something just to indicate that I have interest in hearing more about, but I'm interested in hearing more about how demographics are being tracked in the engagement on the city or Sound Transit side, and just would be interested in continuing to hear about those demographics, including the Indigenous community, including areas of West Seattle that were redlined. I just want to express that interest, and if anyone wants to answer any of that in the room today, I'd welcome it.
What I might suggest is for our next update that we ensure that we're bringing the survey result, or that we work with Sound Transit on the survey results and bring some of that information, particularly on the demographics of who we're reaching, an update on that to you at our next meeting. Excellent.
I know there's at least, Phoebe hasn't spoken yet. Molly, do you have more questions?
Am I asking any brief procedural questions or just West Seattle?
Well, we're running out of time, so any questions, and I know there's at least one more question on Ballard from Kevin. So just want to, and Sarah has to leave at 10:30. So
I need to be upstairs at
So let's just quickly, any other questions we have for Sarah? I'm sorry, go ahead, Molly.
No worries. So just clarifying question, for understanding how the city tools, including the design guidelines, relate to the station experience design guidelines from Sound Transit, will that best be understood at that Q1 2024, or will there be any touch points prior to that to understand how those are interacting?
Vera, do you want to take that?
Yeah, I don't think we will be able to come back to you before 2024, especially if we want to have a well-coordinated, clearly articulated engagement on that. So I would expect a Q1.
Great, thank you I'm really excited that tools briefing is happening before the Sound Transit briefings. So thank you. I'll pass it back. I'll pass it on to Phoebe. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everyone. I don't have any questions or comments, so we can roll through. Thank you for the presentation and the rest of it.
Okay, so just, I know there's any questions on Ballard that we didn't get to, just raise your hands. I know Kevin has one. Go.
So you mostly answered it, but on the South Downtown work, it sounds like that's a joint planning effort between the city and Sound Transit. I presume this is a question / comment that King County Metro or King County is also pretty key.
Yeah.
They're pretty important in that part of the city.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then maybe other jurisdictions too.
Port of Seattle, there's
right, okay.
Major stakeholders. States.
So that was my question. My comment is, having gone through an SDIS process on Eastlink, you know this, and it's really more of an issue for Sound Transit, but the good thing about an SDIS is you get to explore and evaluate the new ideas that are emerging. The problem is you don't want it to turn into endless churn round 2. So I think the key is, from my experience, and I'm sure yours too, is going to be, okay, what's fixed, if anything's fixed? What's still a variable? What's our process and timing and technical work needed to resolve each one of those? I mean, I think that's going to be your huge challenge for 2024 collectively. So we're just not back at the same place 2 years from now, because that can happen.
Yeah.
And I think on Eastlink, Sound Transit and Bellevue both kind of, because the city of Bellevue was really driving the issues that went into the SDIS, but kind of agreed, we're not going back to the drawing board. This is really what we're focusing on in this new document. So I hope that.
If I could, I know that was a comment, but if I could respond to it, just absolutely want to concur with that, and want to acknowledge that, between the draft EIS and the action that Sound Transit Board took, so that draft EIS in early 2022 and the action in 23, there was a year of engagement on further studies. Right. So that was the drawing board.
Right.
And so much of that work happened and identified additional alternatives or refinements to alternatives that would have less impact or provide greater access or benefit. That was the drawing board that is now going to feed into this process, and the city is very grateful that Sound Transit did that work, and we want to be a partner in moving this project forward.
Okay,
Just a quick follow-up on that. I think it would be great. I think we're probably all in this room very interested, or maybe most interested in the South Downtown Hub. And so I don't know if that was flagged as a future topic, but I think more information on kind of what's in, what are those variables that are still being discussed, how are they being discussed? And I think I would also be curious to know, you mentioned various other stakeholders, but who those stakeholders are and how they're participating, I think would be great.
yeah, great. Anything else before Sarah has to head upstairs? Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vera.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Great to see you again.
We may, and Valerie's done this in a couple of other places where we'll talk to commissioners and have a follow-up email. Just here's what we think we heard. Let's talk about what the next steps are in terms of what your next presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie promised to come back.
She
She said, yes, she said. I'm leaving.
Uh-oh.
No, she's,
Okay.
she made a sign.
And,
So-
Vera and Lizzie, I think we're gonna take a minute, and Kate, hi Kate. Gonna take a minute and then we'll transition to the next
Okay.
item, which is the station